I'm Brian Freise alongside Laura Duncan, and you're listening to the Triggered and True podcast. This is a podcast that's all about you, discovering you, going back for you, being with you. You're more than the pain you've experienced, the behaviors you're expressing, and the thoughts that run through your head. Together, we will find your true self, which has always been with you. It's just been covered up. Tune in as we show you how to feel your pain, get comfort, and go play as you return to you. It's time to transform from triggered to true. Hello and welcome everyone to the 57th edition of the Triggered and True podcast with myself, Brian Freise, and Laura Duncan. Laura, how are you doing today?
Doing pretty good. I'm glad we're here. I'm glad we're recording. It's always fun to do podcasts with you.
Yeah, Laura had a great triggering event as we were
Yes.
leading into today. And she was only 35 minutes late.
That's it. Yeah.
That's it.
No.
Yeah. And I wasn't triggered at all because
I know I got on and I was like, wow, this really doesn't trigger you. And I was like, that's pretty interesting. It is always interesting to see what does trigger us and what doesn't trigger us.
Yep. Yeah, I told her I was in sales and I'm used to people making me wait.
And it's funny too, just even in this situation, because it was a technology issue, which I have my sophisticated adult brain knows, like I'll figure it out, but it'll take time, which I'm okay with normally. But my trigger was more of like having somebody wait for you while you figure it out. And I just wanted to be like, let's just do it another time. But
I would be way more triggered if it was the other way around, because I know
yes.
Your schedule is usually really tight, It's
it really is, and so is yours.
We always have these hard stops, because
exactly.
Laura's in such demand. She's got the next TV media interview right at the time. But anyway, so
yeah.
But we're here.
We are here. Happy to be here.
Yep. So the title of today's episode is The Art and Science of the Remote Control Exercise. All the way back on, I believe it was episode 6, we talked about the remote control exercise, and we have not had a dedicated episode to it since then. We've no doubt talked about it in other episodes.
Yeah.
But we're going to do something kind of exciting. So we're going to go deep into the remote control exercise, and then we are looking for volunteers for a future podcast to work through the remote control exercise.
Yeah.
As part of the podcast.
Yep. So. And my heart in that is, we can teach you so many concepts, which we are happy to do through this podcast. And then we also give a lot of practical steps of things you can do and resources, because we really want that application. But I also think you, the listener, being able to watch us take someone through the process, you learn it in such a deeper way. And sometimes we have questions about it that we don't even know we have questions about. And when you actually see it happen, it makes so much more sense. So I just thought it would be such a great way just to do that on the podcast. You can actually hear or see, if you're on YouTube, you can hear a person go through the process so that it can help you go through your own process too.
Absolutely. So some people are probably wondering, but yes, that sounds great, but what the heck is the remote control exercise? Yeah. So for some, this will be new. For some, it'll be a bit of a review. So why don't you start off, Laura, about describing what the remote control exercise is and also how you came up with the idea.
Yeah. So what the remote control exercise is, it's this process exercise that we do to be able to use the compassion method in a really practical way of going step by step through recognizing that what triggers us, being able to go through the process to be able to come to a place that we're able to see the wound behind the trigger. Because for every trigger, there's actually a wound motivating that reaction. And most of the time we just stay in have a reaction, suppression, or self-control. Have a reaction, self-control. And the remote control exercise is, the purpose of it is to be able to actually walk through a trigger as close to or in real time, so that you no longer having the trigger happen to you, but you actually start to be able to work with the reaction, work with the trigger to be able to go through it, to come back to yourself, come back to that sophisticated brain that is able to reason and work through things.
So kind of going back to when you were first developing the compassion method, the remote control exercise wasn't something you had from the beginning.
No,
so
yeah.
When did you kind of incorporate it?
So people would come and meet with me, once a week or every 2 weeks, depending upon, how often they wanted to come meet. And if you think about it, if you're only meeting for 1 hour once a week, and I'm teaching and helping you process through things, but then you go back to your everyday life and you don't know how to do what we're actually doing together during that time, then you're going to usually not be able to continue that process on your own time. And the remote control exercise is actually rewiring your brain to respond different in conflict, to respond differently when we're going through something. But that takes real life situations, real time, not coming in 2 weeks later to a session with me and being like, okay, which is okay. I had this trigger, let's walk through it. But I found that if people weren't doing the homework, weren't doing the remote control exercise on a daily basis for themselves, with themselves, they were not being able to move forward because every time they had a trigger come up, they'd have to come back to me. And part of why I call myself a consultant versus a coach is I want to consult you and how you can go through your trigger on your own time and in your real life. So the step-by-step process was literally me like writing out what I do when you're in a one-on-one session with me and you get triggered or you bring up a trigger. And that was the exact process that I walk people through every time. So then I put it into words, step-by-step process that people could actually write down. Because when you're in a trigger, it's very hard to remember this podcast. It's really hard to remember what you've learned because it's all in that sophisticated brain and it turns off in those moments of trigger. And now we're primarily using our amygdala to navigate major conflict. And we all know that that doesn't go very well. So to be able to have it something that you can actually write out and connect to became very helpful for my clients that I was working with.
Yeah, your goal is very much to work yourself out of a job.
Exactly. Definitely. I want people to be able to do it on their own and then eventually be able to teach their children and being able to start to change the way you do it for yourself, with yourself. And I'm more of a support that has like training wheels on it until you can ride the bike on your own.
And I know this was very intentional on your part, but when I was meeting with you one-on-one, I mean, I didn't realize this was happening, but I felt very empowered from day one that I can do this. Like
Yeah.
this is something I can do. And it's this is really no different than like going to see a personal trainer. Like if you go to see a personal trainer once a week and that's all you do, you're not gonna see great
Nope.
results.
Exactly. That's such a
Yeah.
great illustration.
Yeah. So we have to go back.
Mm-hmm.
So how soon in the process of somebody kind of just learning about the compassion method and just kind
Yeah.
of either working with you one-on-one, working through the podcast, or maybe they're working with one of your other consultants that they found through your
Yeah.
website. How soon do you think it makes sense to start working through the remote control
Yeah,
exercise?
that's a great question. And so, what I found is usually I don't open with the remote control exercise when I'm meeting with someone for the first time. There are sometimes occasions that I will do that because I see that they've actually already been doing some of the processing with themselves in maybe a different way. So they're aware of some of the components of the remote control exercise. We'll go over it more step by step, but there's 5 steps to the remote control exercise. And if you've and I'll just say, for example, one of them is being able to identify the more tender, softer emotions behind our big reactions that come with triggers. But if you've never recognized that it's not just that you're angry, but you actually have a tender emotion behind it, sometimes the process of connecting to that emotion needs to be practiced first before we go to the next step. So I'll kind of, see where people are at in the process. And if they're more familiar with different steps and they've been able to do that for themselves, I feel like sometimes they'll be ready to do the remote control exercise. But sometimes it can take anywhere between, 2 to 4 sessions before people are feeling like they have each of the pieces well enough to be able to put it together.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that makes sense. I think of the compassion method, or I think of the remote control exercise as kind of the a secret weapon
Yeah.
of the compassion method. It's kind of really where, for me especially, the compassion method really all came together.
Yes, that's such a good way to say it. Yes.
Now, there is danger of looking at this in that way, like it's a weapon or a tool,
Yes.
because a lot of us have this fixation of fixing. Like a lot of
Mm-hmm.
people walk in your door, they want
Oh,
you to
yeah.
fix them.
They
Okay.
recognize their trigger. They're like, fix the trigger.
Or they don't even recognize that. They walk in, I
Yeah,
have
that's true
anxiety.
too.
I
Fix
have
the
anxiety.
external. Yes,
I have
exactly.
depression. Fix me,
Mm-hmm. Yep,
fix me. Or
that's true.
I'm having relational problems. Help me
Mm-hmm.
fix this other person.
Yes, it's usually wanting to fix
Help
something
me.
outside of ourselves that's affecting us.
Right. So, with a lot of people's obsession around fixing, just explain how this can go awry if you don't
Hmm.
have the right motivation here.
Yeah, yeah. So often people will use, like you said, I like the secret weapon one, though. That's kind of fun because it does feel like a secret power, a secret weapon to be able to do things that you were never able to do before because you didn't understand what was happening. It's so empowering to be able to
Hmm.
recognize what's happening. I sometimes use a analogy of like when triggers happen, they feel like a wave crashing on you. And if you've ever been in the ocean, it doesn't feel very good for waves to crash on you and you get tumbled and you can't breathe and you come up and it just makes it a miserable experience. But if you either body surf or surf and you learn how to ride the wave, it actually becomes an enjoyable process. And so you're actually working with the wave, working with the trigger versus it happening to you. So I love that empowerment in that. But I'm going off on a rabbit trail. But coming back to, being able to connect with the remote control exercise or any part of the compassion method, we want it to come from a place of relationship and connection. It's very popular to hear tool or work or other words that imply that we have to use this tool to fix something that's broken
Right.
versus being able to recognize this is actually an opportunity. And this tool is not a tool to fix it, but it's a tool to see more of ourselves, more of our pain, more of the ability to see past the reaction to the deeper thing that's actually motivating the reaction in the first place.
I think it very important to go back to one of the first things you ever told me is that you're not broken.
Mm-hmm.
You don't need to be fixed.
Exactly.
And so many people are even maybe drawn to a podcast like this because they feel like they're broken.
Yes. And
And
in a moment of trigger, it does feel like you're broken, like it
mhm,
does feel that way, but you're not broken. You have an amazing, sophisticated brain that scientists can still not even figure out how intricate and involved that brain is. And when you're in that sophisticated brain, your brain works perfectly. It's
mhm,
just when we get triggered, we go into our amygdala and that sophisticated brain shuts down and then we feel broken.
right, right. And it's very shaming.
Very shaming,
Uh,
especially when we did our last episode on, what is it when you feel like you're failing,
yeah.
and it feels like
Mhm.
so much shame when you've been doing this forever. I even find it sometimes. Sometimes I get stuck in the remote control exercise. 5 easy steps that I've led thousands of people through that I've, successfully done for myself in the past. But sometimes when I get into an extra big trigger that I'm not able to see clearly, I even get stuck in it at times. And so that's why we need so much assistance in it to be able to go through it. And that's why the remote control exercise, I also like to consider it like an anchor, kind of anchors us back to our brain actually being able to process through it.
Mhm. I was going back through some of my notes from our one-on-one sessions, and one of the things that you said to me was the remote control exercise can be a tool to connect with my heart or simply a tool to help me get out of a trigger.
Mm-hmm, exactly.
And how we want this to be all about connection. You said
Mm-hmm.
connection is the key.
Yep.
So,
And it's kind of also too like, when you just do it to get out of the trigger, it's like putting a band-aid on it. It's not actually healing it. And guess what? Your trigger will always come back if it hasn't been
right.
properly taken care of. So if we approach it just to stop it versus to connect with our heart, it'll come back up in another way again until we properly take care of it.
Well, and I think the nice thing about the remote control exercise too is that in order for us to heal, we've talked about this a lot of times, we have to learn to feel what we're feeling.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
And the remote control exercise, the way I look at it is it helps us feel it in doses.
Yes.
Like it becomes having a bit of a recipe, because it is a bit of a
Mm-hmm.
recipe,
It is
having
a
a
bit of
bit
a
of a
recipe.
formula
Yeah.
helps us to, because a lot of us that we're spending our whole life avoiding feeling, really don't know where to start. And the remote control
Exactly.
exercise kind of gives us some guardrails. Like,
Yep.
we're going to help you
To
feel
start. practicing feeling, to start
Yes.
practicing going through it.
Yeah. Yeah. And it
Well, yeah,
becomes
because if
less
you,
overwhelming.
yes, exactly. Because if you weren't in your early childhood development, if you weren't raised in a home that taught you how to process emotions, emotions can feel very unpredictable. They can feel very
Very scary.
scary because
Yeah.
it just happens to us. We're going along, minding our own business, having a great day. All of a sudden, this person says something, we get a phone call, something happens. And now we went from peaceful, happy to out of control, feeling like, huge emotions that we don't know how to navigate because we were never taught. And also usually shame for the big emotions and not taught how to walk through them.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. That would be very, very, very similar to how I grew up. So yeah, definitely spent a lot of time not feeling emotions for
Yeah.
sure. For sure. So we've talked a little bit about how this process is scientific, and you've kind of hit on it from the standpoint
Mm-hmm.
of when you're in a trigger, you're stuck in your amygdala,
Yeah.
you're stuck in the primal part of your brain, you don't have access
Yeah.
to your more sophisticated aspects. What are some other ways? You started to talk about how you can kind of rewire. So just talk a little bit more of the science behind the remote control exercise, and maybe
Yeah.
even why you arranged it the way you did from a
Definitely.
scientific
Yeah.
standpoint.
Yeah, that's great to hear. So, some of the neuroscience of it is, when we have a reaction, like when you think about being at the doctor and they have the little hammer and they like hit your knee and it reacts, you're not kicking, it's a reaction that's happening when that
Hmm.
little hammer hits your knee. So, when we have reactions, we go into protectors, we go into ways to stop the reaction, especially if it's going to lead to disconnection. So, react, suppress, or react, explode, fight, flight, freeze, fawn. We all have these reactions that happen. So for our whole lives, when we had conflict, we had something that triggered us, we would go into a certain reaction. So what you're doing as you're rewiring and you're able to recognize what you're feeling and go through the process, getting your needs met, being able to come down from that trigger through taking care of your heart, what ends up happening is you you no longer are being you're no longer getting trapped in the reaction. You're
Hmm.
starting to say the reaction, instead of going fight, flight, freeze, fawn, the reaction starts being curious.
Yeah. Why is
The
this bugging me
reaction,
so bad?
yes, exactly,
Yes,
it starts to become
I
a
can relate to
curious
this.
thing. It starts to become a self reflection. It starts to be able to say, hey, I remember this before. I thought it was them, but really this reminds me of. So we start getting curious with ourselves. We start getting curious with whatever's causing us to trigger. We start going into that, hold on a second. And that's why I like the remote control exercise, the pause.
Yeah.
So instead of
That's step
reacting,
number one, by the way. She just gave it
by the
away.
way, I just gave a little one out
Step
there.
one.
Yeah. Yeah.
Step
Step
one.
one
We'll
is
go through
that
the steps,
pause.
but step one is
And
pause.
it's training ourselves every time I do it to pause versus react. And I love the fact that it becomes automatic because we have so many things that try to teach us how to be self-controlled. Anger management. I get angry. Oh, I shouldn't be angry because it's causing problems. So instead of actually getting to the root of why I'm angry in the first place, I suppress the anger by controlling it, but it keeps coming back up. And so when I recognize, hey, I want to fight right now, but I know that's just covering up a wound. Something must be hurting. I'm
Hmm.
going to pause instead of react and explore. And that starts to become our go to versus our go to is to react. Our brain rewires for our go to pause and connect with ourselves.
Nice.
And
Yeah.
it's so amazing when it happens, especially when like you're not even like trying because you've been practicing. Like when people actually do the exercise, I have some clients that'll come in and they'll be like, it doesn't work. And I'm like, are you doing it? And they're like, not really. And I'm like, well, it's probably not going to work unless you do it.
Yeah.
So if you're
My
actually
biceps
doing
haven't grown a bit. Have you
yeah, I
done any
keep just
curls?
walking into the gym, then
No.
I walk out. And I don't know why the gym's not working. um,
Yeah.
but yeah, you actually have to do it. But when I've seen people do it consistently, even for like 2 weeks, they'll do it like, once a day or, every other day for like 2 weeks. All of a sudden, they're like, I wasn't upset. It was the weirdest thing. normally I'd be so mad. I've been mad for 20 years in my marriage because every time he does this thing, I always get mad. And all of a sudden, it wasn't because I was trying not to get mad. I wasn't mad.
Yeah. Because that whole trying not to get mad thing, that's
Exactly.
only going to work for so
It
long.
only works for so long
Yeah.
because
Right.
eventually it's going to
It'll
have to
boil
come
over.
out. Yep.
It's like you've got this, like there's this pain inside of all of us that it just, it wants to come out, and we can tame it to a bit at times with the protectors and with the
Mhm.
ignoring it and going to anything else besides letting ourselves feel it. But eventually
Yeah.
it's going to catch you in a weak moment, which is what we talked about last week with the failure thing, feeling
Yep.
like a failure, because it'll catch you in that weak moment. You're tired, you're sleepy, you're whatever, you're hungry. And all of a sudden it just comes roaring out like a lion,
Yep.
you know.
Yes, it sure does when you no longer can control it because it's
But that
actually
lion
not.
can be tamed
Yes, it
and
can. And
comforted.
the beautiful thing about it when we talk about doing the exercise, doing the remote control exercise for heart connection, when we're doing it with that purpose in mind, it starts to become this relationship that we're having versus this behavior management.
Right.
And it's so because the whole reason we're getting triggered in the first place is we have pain or we have unmet need that hasn't been taken care of. But the reason why triggers are so persistent, it's actually our brain and our heart trying to get what we need to heal. It
Yeah.
would be like if I had like a splinter in my skin, it's going to get all infected and painful. And I remember like one of my kids didn't show me their splinter forever. And it was like the size of like a 50-cent piece. It was like so big and it was like
Hmm.
infected and it was like pus was in there and it was horrible. And I was just like looking and going like, can't believe that this little tiny splinter could cause all that, pain and
Mm-hmm.
inflammation and infection. But that's kind of how it is. We all have these splinters of pain in our hearts that we've left by trying to control it, suppress it, ignore it. And now it's an infection. And so now it's getting louder and louder and louder. The pain gets louder, trying to get our attention to heal the wound that's causing that infection. We have to actually take the splinter out versus just keep trying to put a band-aid on it or put ointment on it without actually getting rid of the pain that's there by taking care of it.
Hmm. Well, yeah, we've hit some great ways of how this is scientific. And I think
Yes.
comparing it to some of these medical things is really helpful and
Mm-hmm.
working
Yeah.
out and all that stuff. There's a lot of
Yes.
science there.
Yes.
But the title of the episode is The Art and the Science of the
Mm-hmm.
Remote Control Exercise. So how is it an art?
To me, it's an art because it's the art ultimately of knowing yourself.
Hmm.
But the remote control exercise is that tool, that weapon that helps us be able to know ourselves. And there's an art to it. The first
Hmm.
time you start asking yourself some of the questions that are part of the remote control exercise, you're going to get usually more, you're not superficial, but you're going to get more surfacey answers because you haven't developed the art of it. So when you ask a question, you're usually pretty satisfied with whatever your answer is because you don't know how to go deeper into it. But
Hmm.
with anything that you practice, anything that you repeatedly do, that repetition starts to cause us to be able to go into it as an art of I know myself so well. Just like if I knew anything so well, I'm able to actually it becomes an art to it versus it being a methodical process that we go through.
Yeah. And I look at it as it's kind of a recipe, it's kind of a formula, but it has this structure that really helps,
Mm-hmm.
but it's beautiful and messy, and it's like no two times through it are ever the same.
Mm-mm. Nope.
This isn't like we're working out a math problem that there's one right
Mm-hmm.
answer at the end of it.
Yes, that's a
You know what I'm
really good
saying?
point.
There's not
Yeah.
like one right answer at the end of this.
Mm-hmm.
Because the thing is we don't fully even know the answer, because really the answer is getting to know ourselves, and we don't really even fully
Exactly.
know ourselves.
No, exactly. We've never developed that. We've never explored that. And so all of a sudden we're asking these questions. And I like how you said that. There's a structure to the remote control exercise. But what I would say is that it's the essence or substance of compassion, but the substance also of how we feel towards ourselves that
Mm.
actually is the healing power to it. And so if you
Mhm.
just go through the structure of it, if you went through the remote control exercise, but you were not connected to yourself, you were not connected to your emotions, and you went through the formula or the recipe, it would not produce the same outcome because you went through it as a structure without actually having life in it. And that's what sometimes, like, especially people that are like rule followers, they'll like leave my office the first time with it and they'll say, I actually really did try. I tried every single day, but I couldn't do it because I tried to do the steps. But ultimately, what we figured out together is that I tried to do the steps without my heart in it.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So it's not a math book.
Mm-mm.
Yeah.
But it gives you guidelines and structure. And sometimes you might, spend only a little bit of time with one area. And so most of the time you walk through it with a different area. It's kind of all just based on what we actually need in that moment.
Yeah. Yeah. So I look at it too as you mentioned this a few times, the compassion. So this to me was a gateway. So it opens the door to compassion
Mm-hmm. Yes.
and the helps you to remove the barrier from receiving comfort.
Yep.
And the barrier to receiving comfort really is our protectors,
Yep.
the things we
Exactly.
throw up.
Yes.
Yeah.
We are protecting
That's our barriers.
ourselves from the
Yeah.
very thing that we need
Yes.
because we're more familiar with the pain and the trigger than we are familiar with knowing ourselves and loving ourselves.
And I give this the analogy, the drowning person analogy, like you
Mm.
can't swim right up to them and help them.
No, they're going to
It's,
thrash. They're going to push you
right.
away. They're going to drown
The
you.
very thing, like you could be professional swimmer
Yeah.
and you swim up to them and the very thing they need,
Mm-hmm.
they're not
Yeah.
receiving.
Yeah. You
Yeah.
do not see the first response. Oh, I'm just going to not do anything. That survival instinct causes
Yeah.
that fight
Yeah.
against the very thing we need.
Yeah. So let's walk through the steps. So the first step you already gave,
Yes.
which
So the
is
first step,
pause.
which is most important, is the pause. And that pause is being able to do two things. It's being able to create that habit of pausing whatever's going on, but it also is creating the habit of not blaming. When I
Yes.
pause the trigger, I stop blaming the trigger and I turn towards myself to explore why that trigger or why that circumstance is triggering me in the first place. We spend so much of our lives blaming people and circumstance that
For
we
ourselves.
never, or ourselves
Hmm.
exactly, we blame
People, we're
ourselves,
people, I guess. Yeah.
people,
Hmm.
yeah, ourselves, others, God. We blame so many things. We're frantically blaming things to avoid facing the pain within us. It's easier for me to, when that pain, like you said, we all have that pain ball, when that pain
Hmm.
comes up, it's easier to try to displace it on you than to actually look at that pain and face it. And the
Hmm.
remote control exercise helps you pause the person or circumstance to look at the pain.
And you nailed it exactly. This to me is the absolute most important step because if you can't do this, you can't go any further.
You can't
Like,
go any further.
yeah.
I remember when the first time I was doing it, because I'm a very justifiable blamer. So if it wasn't
Hmm.
justifiable, I could pause it and be like, you're right, I shouldn't be blaming you because
It's kind of
there's
ambiguous about who's at fault here. It's
yes, exactly.
ambiguous.
All
Yeah.
right, I'll do the exercise. But it felt so blatantly justifiable that this person did this thing, my brain couldn't pause. I'd be like, but I was fine before they walked in the room. They are the problem. What is the,
Totally.
it's
Yeah.
not me as the common denominator. It's them walking into the room and saying that thing that caused me to trigger. It's not my problem. I actually was offended that someone would be able to come up and treat me badly. And then I had to do the remote control exercise when they behaved that way. I wanted them to change. I wanted them to acknowledge it. It didn't make sense to me in the beginning to actually face my process when they were blatantly doing something that wasn't right, that wasn't okay. So I literally, for like probably a good week, I'd put my hand on my head and be like, it's not about them.
Yep.
And I would literally have like, yes, it is. No, it's not. Yes, it is. Because it was so hard for me to actually give 100% pause and say, it's not about them right now. And then put 100% attention on me. That was very difficult. I would do like 30 on me, 70 on them, but I couldn't do 100% eyes on me to explore what was going on inside of me.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that. Because that little mantra, it's not about blank.
Yes.
It's not about whatever the circumstance. It's not
Yes.
about the deal I just lost, or it's not
Mm-hmm.
about, the fight that I had with my wife.
Yes.
It's not about my
Yes.
wife,
Yes.
And I would say that to myself to help me pause. And
Yes.
I'd say it
And
over and over again. It's not
yes. And
about, it's not
it
about, it's
is
not
an
about.
art, just even
Yeah.
that first one, it is an art to pause. We are wrestling within ourselves to actually be able to surrender
Hmm.
and to pause.
There's a second thing that I would do that you mentioned that really helps me is when I find myself really, whatever, you've talked about the bigger the trigger, the littler you are.
Yeah.
So I would just say to myself, I'm going to get little with this. I'm going to give
Yes. I
myself
like that.
permission to be little.
Yeah.
I don't have to be adult me with all the
Yes.
responsibility and all the pressure that comes with being an adult. I'm not going to be that person right now. I am just
Yes.
going to get little, and I'm going to go back to a time when the world was much simpler,
Yeah.
you
No,
know,
I love that. That is
and
so
that
good
helps
because
me
it's,
pause.
yes. And it's also kind of helping you recognize what brain you're in too.
Yeah.
Because
I'm
sometimes we
not in
think
my
we're this
adult brain.
very smart adult in that moment. We're just, justifiably super angry right now because of what they did. And we think we're an adult in that moment. So I love how you say, I'm going to get little with this because it's actually helping you get to the part of your brain that's actually the part that we need to pay attention to.
Yep.
All that trying to figure it out and justify and get the jury to come in and agree with us that they're wrong. And people always say, like, would you be okay with it? And I'd be like, no, I wouldn't be okay with it. But why it wouldn't
But I
be
could
okay
be
for
okay.
exactly. I wouldn't be okay with
Wouldn't be
it.
my preference ever, but
Exactly. But I'd also say, like, but this is the thing. I agree with you that someone shouldn't treat someone like that. But why it bothers me and why it bothers you are two different things. So just
well,
saying
and
that it's
it's about
wrong,
degrees.
exactly. So
Yeah.
just saying it's wrong and bad doesn't actually face why my heart, myself, saw that as a threat, saw that as something that I needed to fight against versus being able to fight for myself.
Well, yeah, there's a part inside of a person that has to fight so hard because they feel like the only way they could ever be okay is if that situation outside of themselves gets fixed.
Yes,
That
exactly.
person stops doing that, the weather stops doing
I
that, the market
know.
stops doing that,
But we're going to
whatever,
spend
name
our
it.
whole lives because there is so many things outside of our control
Yeah.
that if it's not one, it's going to be another. So you spend your whole entire life in defense versus offense says, I can be okay even if blank is not okay.
Well, and 1,000%, the remote control exercise, there's definitely elements of this that's defensive when you first are learning it.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
But the whole goal of it is to put you on the offense. The whole
Yes.
goal
It's
here is to
to,
put you on the
yep,
offense. Yeah.
exactly.
So I think one thing that could help people as they're learning these steps here to realize, and I think help prevent some frustration, is that, especially at the beginning, this is not going to get done in the moment.
No, no, it's
This is
not
going to
going to
get
get
done in
done.
hindsight.
This is going to be hindsight. And I always tell people that I work with, come back to it as soon as you're able to, whether that's 5 minutes, 5 hours, 5 days,
5 years.
5 years. Come back to it when you're
Yeah.
able to. In the moment, your brain is not working correctly. You're not going to be able to effectively be able to connect to yourself when your brain, your amygdala is in a 10 trigger. That means that your whole sophisticated brain is turned off and you are in full primal mode. That it's like a kid that didn't get something and is just throwing this huge fit. You're not going to go up to that child that's throwing this huge fit and be able to calm them down. We're not going to be able to calm our child brain down in that moment. We're going to have to wait a moment until things calm down in order to engage.
Well, and like when I said 5 years, my goal wouldn't be is that people wait 5 years from right now to start doing this. The goal would be that I think, at least I do, maybe I'm just speaking for myself, but I'm sure others are the same way. There'll be things that'll just pop up in my brain that happened a long time ago that I'll feel extreme shame about or embarrassment, or be like, or just be a reminder. Something will trigger me back to
Yep.
that memory from
Yes.
way back when. So I can
Oh,
go
yeah.
back to that event that happened a
Yes.
long time ago that was really embarrassing or whatever it was,
Yeah.
or I'm ashamed of, and I can work through this process.
Yeah. And I have certain pain points, certain things that have happened that it has taken years to
Yeah.
fully walk through it to the degree and to the depth that my heart needed for me to walk through it. And so it does take time. I got layers of it, of course. I was able to know more about myself and I was able to understand more of my process. But sometimes it takes time and building that trust and relationship and connection with yourself to actually get to some of the deeper wounds that we are so strongly protecting. And that protection can last for years.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's move on to the second step.
So after we've paused, we've turned our affections, our attention to ourselves, we're going to start with the question, what did I feel? We start with, what did I feel in my reaction? And that's the opportunity to be angry, to be able to say whatever you need to say.
The big emotion, the big dramatic one.
The big dramatic one, the ones that we're not supposed to. Sometimes when people would process it outside of it, they would say like, I think I was a little bit annoyed and just a little bit frustrated. And I'm like, I bet in the moment it was a little bit more than that, but we're not supposed to have those big emotions. So sometimes when we go through this, we're not as honest with how big our emotions felt because we're not supposed to feel those.
Some people, not like me, whereas me, like when it gets really bad, it comes out, you know, like there may have been a time in my life where a hole or two or three maybe got punched in a wall. I don't know. I think that might have happened,
Yeah.
So that's big and dramatic. And for some people though, big and dramatic is happening on the inside, but on the outside, they're
frozen or they're, just wanting to get out of there. They're disassociating, they're disconnecting.
So whatever the big,
whatever
it doesn't
it is,
have to be, external. It could be really big and dramatic going on the inside.
Yes,
too.
Exactly. So you want to write all those down. So now we've felt our reaction emotions.
So some examples you've given are like, angry. I feel out of control.
Yep.
I feel frustrated. Helpless and hopeless are dead giveaways. So like one of my great indicators that I'm in a triggered place, and I'll even catch myself, is when I feel like there's no hope.
Yeah.
Like when I can't even see a light at the end of the tunnel, I'm like, wait a second. No. I know right away. Dead giveaway, that and sweat running down my back. Okay, that's the other one. My back will sweat and I'll be like, I don't even know this. All of a sudden my back is really hot. I'm like, oh, I must be triggered.
Yep, exactly.
I'm triggered. Something got me,
Yep.
So hopelessness and sweat running down my back. Those are my two big go-tos.
So we have those reactions that we can, as we become more in tune, we can go, it's happening.
Yeah.
So then from there, we want to funnel down to tender emotions. And that process can start out with like the bigger ones. And then sometimes we kind of have like medium emotions. And then it brings us down to our most tender emotions, which is sad, scared, or lonely, or sometimes a little bit of a combination of them. But usually you'll feel one primarily stronger in that moment. So,
and you're like, and this is really important because you boil all of these big reaction emotions.
Yep.
All of it. You funnel them down to
this
3.
little sad. But that little sad is like a splinter that causes a big reaction.
Yeah.
And so we're going down to that wound ultimately. And that's the tenderness of sad, scared, or lonely. And once we've identified that we are one of those, then we're going to ask ourselves, what do you need?
Step 3.
Step 3, what do you need? Commonly, people say, I need that person to stop, or I need that person to say sorry. But remember,
we got to go back to step 1 then.
Yep. And then we go back and we repause them again. They're frozen. They can't give you anything in that moment.
Remember, it's a remote control exercise, and that's the whole thing here. You can pause them.
The remote has paused them. So if you do feel like, I just need them to say sorry, I just need them to empty the trash, I just need them to do whatever I wanted them to do, go back and pause again. It's not about them right now.
I need them to say, I'm sorry.
Yep. I know exactly. You actually do not need someone to say they're sorry to be okay.
Yep.
We like when people say sorry for their actions. They don't have to say sorry for you to be okay.
Remember, we're empowering you right now.
Exactly. So now we've recognized
if someone else has to do something for you to be okay, that's not very empowering.
You're going to wait your whole life for that person to say sorry, and you're going to be tormented by it because you're not okay within yourself. So being able to come to that third step, which is the 10 gifts, which is our 10 emotional needs. And you can go back and listen to the 10 gifts because I don't want to elaborate too much on it just for time's sake. But there's 10 emotional needs that we needed in childhood, that sad, scared, and lonely is needs. So a lot of times I'll say, what does your sadness need? That helps us get smaller. That helps us stay connected to the sadness. What did that sadness need? Oh, that sadness needed to be held. Oh, that sadness needed to be seen. That sadness wanted someone to be with. So now I'm recognizing, oh, that's what that sadness needed. Once I recognize, yep, what I need. Yeah, play. Exactly. That's a big one.
That was one I had this week.
Oh, yeah.
And it was so funny how we got there. I mean, you would look at the thing that triggered me and how that ended up in play.
I know. Sometimes it makes a logical
Like,
sense and
wow.
sometimes it doesn't because we're irrational.
Well, it makes logical
moments.
sense now, but
Yes,
like
but in the
it
moment.
certainly didn't at the beginning. I'm like, I knew I was triggered. I knew I was gonna, but how I ended up there, it was like, wow. And you know what? It took someone else. I wasn't taking the time to do this.
Mm-hmm.
So then someone asked me that knows a little bit about this process,
Yeah.
not a ton, but they know a little
Yeah.
bit about it. And she asked me, she said, so what do you think, where do you think it's coming from?
Mm.
Because we knew it wasn't about the thing.
Yeah.
Like we both knew that.
Yes.
And then she just threw it out. I'm like, oh, I guess I haven't really spent the time because it was one of those triggers that was easy to kind of live with.
Yes, we do. We live with some until they become too uncomfortable. We live with a lot of triggers that are just tolerable, but then you end up living a tolerable life.
Right. That's great. Great way to say it.
Yeah.
But anyway, I recognized I needed play. So then we're going to move from where? That was step 3. What do you
Mm-hmm.
need?
So
And then
now
we're
that you
going
recognize
to,
I needed that play, you're going to move to the next step, which is giving yourself compassion. And giving yourself compassion is being with yourself in your emotions, being with yourself in your lack, being able to come back to who you are in the middle of that. So doesn't just compassion does see your pain because you just walk through those steps to recognize what's hurting and what you're feeling and what you're needing. But compassion goes a step further and says, your pain matters, but you matter even more. And that step is so key for what we talked about earlier of keeping your heart connected to the process, keep your heart connected to the remote control exercise versus trying to fix it because we've recognized what's not working. Now, compassion says, I see you and I want to be with you in this. And at that time would be also the opportunity to be able to help bring gift givers in, like we've talked about, to be able to see ourselves at small in that moment, especially if we were really triggered, because compassion can see where our heart is at in that moment and be with us in that moment.
yeah. And the compassion is that, we've talked about how you talk about a trigger is like an emotional allergic reaction. Like
Yes.
you talked about the hammer and the
Mm-hmm.
reflexes. And so we have that. And then the compassion is like that balm that
Yes.
it takes the sting out of the bee stinger.
Mm-hmm.
It just
It
takes that
definitely
out.
does. As you say some of the compassion words to yourself after you've gone through each of those when you get to that fourth step, you're able to actually be able to say, I see you trying so hard.
Mm-hmm.
I can tell you care so much. It's going to be okay. I'm going to stay with you until you feel safe. You start to speak those words to that wound, to those emotions, to that lack. And as we do with genuine connection, it starts to soothe, it starts to heal the inflammation of our triggered brain so it can calm down and our sophisticated brain can come back on. Now, the last step is unpausing that person or circumstance. And when we unpause, we are now able to see it differently because our trigger has gone down. I always tell people you may still be a little bit triggered. It doesn't always go down to 0. And that's not really the goal.
No, it doesn't ever really go down to 0.
No, we're not trying to get rid of it to be successful. The success was that I made contact with my heart.
Yeah.
I was able to recognize there's more to this story. I was able to recognize that there was pain that was making this feel so big and so out of control. And now that pain is soothed. So now when I look back at the situation, it doesn't feel the same anymore.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And you talk about it on the scale of 1 to 10. And I do that a lot. Okay. So going into it, I felt it was 8, 9, 10. It was
Yep.
high, and then coming out of it, am I at a 5 or lower?
Yeah.
And then I start to see where's my hope, because I said, the two things, that the hope, I
Yep.
lose all track of hope, or my back is sweaty.
Mm-hmm.
So, okay, the big one for me is like, okay, can I see hope in the future now?
Yeah.
And
Yep.
maybe it's just a flicker, but can I
Yep.
see it?
Yeah, exactly. Yes, you can
Can I
see it
see hope?
again.
Can I see
Yeah.
hope that exists even if I don't get out of this situation that I don't like that
Yeah.
I'm in, or this person keeps doing what they're doing for the rest
Yep.
of my life? You know what
Yep.
I'm saying?
Exactly.
Can I be okay?
Yep.
Can I be okay? Can
And
I
that
see
is
hope?
so important. I love that as an indicator of, okay, I see hope. Okay, I'm back in my real brain. I'm back into
Hmm.
myself again. I can see, even if not completely clear, I can see more clearly.
Yeah. Yeah. So, what are some reasons, kind of in our finishing time here, what are
Yeah.
some reasons why this maybe wouldn't work?
Yeah.
Like this whole
So
process, what are some reasons where it kind of goes off the rails?
yeah, some of the top ones that I see people struggle with the most is number one, the first step, the
Yeah.
pause.
Can't
When we
stop
can't
blaming.
stop
Yeah.
blaming, we can't give ourselves proper attention and proper connection in order to be able to recognize what the wound is. And so we have to learn how to stop the blame cycle to take care of ourselves. And like I said, that might be that you just stay at one until you can stop
It's funny.
blaming.
I'm not, I don't, you've talked about how you've met one-on-one with people, thousands, and I've met, single digits, probably. I don't know. It's probably more than that. I probably met one-on-one with 20, 30
Yeah,
people.
it's
All
been a
right.
little bit
So,
more than that.
like this, I remember this one guy, he kept bringing up these other things. I'm like, nope, we ain't talking about that.
Yeah.
That's off limits.
Yeah.
Like, and I
Yeah.
remember it's so funny because it kept coming back. I'm like, nope, we ain't talking about that.
Yeah. It
And
is
that's
hard.
almost what you got to do to yourself when you're going through.
Yes.
It's
No,
like,
no,
nope,
definitely. You're wrestling in
nope.
there because everything in us is fighting that it's not inside of me. It's outside. It's outside. It's
No,
outside.
they are a jerk. Okay,
Yeah.
they're a jerk. We'll just set them aside. We'll set the jerk
Yes.
aside and we'll
Yep.
come back to the jerk later. You
Yes.
know?
And it's okay to come back, but you're going to have such a more successful
Yeah.
conversation if you actually work through the trigger versus reacting to the trigger. But for that moment, that pause is everything.
Yeah.
Number two, not really feeling what you're feeling. Sometimes we try to intellectualize what we're feeling and look at it more like from a logical perspective without allowing ourselves to actually feel it.
Too much science, not enough art. Maybe
Exactly.
too
Yes.
much left brain, not enough right brain.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. So we want to be able to really practice feeling. And sometimes I'll give people the homework of just 5 minutes a day, set a timer, and just feel anything you're feeling. Triggers, but also good things too. Whatever emotions you're feeling, practice feeling. And again, people go like, that seems like you just automatically feel. If our emotions were suppressed in early childhood development, we disassociate and disconnect from the emotion before we actually feel it. We might feel like a wave of it, and then our brain just shuts down and says, we're
Oh,
not going to feel that.
immediately.
And
Right.
so
Yeah.
practicing feeling is important.
Yeah.
The third thing is when we're not actually connected to compassion, we're still trying to fix, we still feel sorry for, we're still trying to figure it out versus just be with ourselves in that moment. So practicing compassion is important. It is an art. Each of these steps is an art. When you put them all together, it creates this art of all those pieces actually functioning versus knowing them separately, but not actually knowing how to make them work together. That's the
Hmm.
beauty of the remote control exercise is it takes being able to stop the blame cycle, connect to your emotions, get tender, get soft, be able to know what you need, be able to apply compassion. And that process of putting those 5 parts together is the art of self-compassion, of
Hmm.
the compassion method, of the remote control exercise.
Yeah. Yeah. One of the things that you talked about too was, if you can't, we won't recognize it in the moment. So I think sometimes, I know I had a tendency to be like, oh, I missed my opportunity there.
Yeah.
I had the thing, I didn't do the remote control exercise, and I would be like, it's too late now, but it's just not. We talked about
No,
that.
it'll
So
come. Like I always say, like when people are like, I'm fine. I'm like, did you get triggered? Yeah. Then you're not fine. it's going to keep coming back up and reminding you, just like a kid that's hungry. They're not going to stop until they get fed. Your heart's not going to stop until it gets fed.
Mm-hmm.
So it'll come back
Right.
up again.
Right.
You'll have another opportunity. I guarantee it. Don't worry. The opportunity will come again.
Yes.
Yeah.
And kind of a thing I had in my notes that you had told me, you said the goal is not to get through it,
Mhm.
because I think maybe part of me had that moment. Like, this is
Yeah.
where like some of the analogies to exercise break down, because sometimes in exercise, the goal is just to get through it. You
Yeah.
know,
Because your heart's
when
not
people are
connected to it. It's a
training for
physical
something,
thing.
yeah, it's a physical thing,
Exactly.
right? But no, the goal here isn't just to get through it and say, okay, I did my remote control exercise today, check my
Yep.
box.
Yep.
The goal is to be with yourself.
Yeah.
And with
That's
that as the
good.
goal, you have it being, you said it's always a success.
Yep. It
You
always
can't
is.
fail here. It's
Mm-mm.
always a
Even if I was
success.
only able to get to step one, that was a success. I was able to be with myself and pausing it.
You grade on a really good curve.
Yes.
You got a big curve, Laura.
Well, if you think about it, whatever area that you struggle the most in, that is going to be your hardest one. And it's also going to be your biggest success.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. So, okay, for the future podcasts, someone that
Yes.
wants to do this live, you know what? It
Yes.
wouldn't be live because we don't
Well,
record these
it will be
live. So,
recorded as all of our podcasts are.
yeah. Yeah.
But it will
Right.
be a recorded podcast that you will be part of, that you will be able to have me and Brian walk you through that process in real time. Well, maybe not real time because the trigger won't be happening in that moment. It could be, but
Maybe.
it might be actually.
Maybe.
But maybe being on the podcast will be the trigger. But but also I
Maybe
want
you'll have a
real.
technical problem trying
Yeah,
to get
I
on.
exactly, and that does happen a lot with me. But anyways, I'm so excited to actually walk a listener through this process and for you to be able to overcome it. If you've been trying to do this for a while, if you've been listening to our podcast and you really want some real, that attention to be able to walk through it effectively, would love to help you walk through it. And then it's twofold. You get to walk through it, and then others get to be able to learn from you walking through it, which I think is so valuable.
Mm-hmm. All right. For everyone watching on YouTube right now, you can see my screen. And if you would like to be a demonstrator or volunteer to demonstrate to be a walkthrough participant of the remote control exercise on a future episode of the podcast, just click right here on the ask button, fill out the information, and let us know how we can connect with you. So Laura is really excited about this, aren't you, Laura?
I am very excited, probably a little too excited, but I can't wait for a listener to come be on our podcast with us. And then also to be able to really walk through it. I just feel like you're all going to be able to apply it more when you actually see what it looks like or hear what it looks like versus just us talking about it. The hands on is so exciting.
Absolutely. Well, thank you everyone for joining us for this episode number 57 of Triggered and True. And we look forward to hearing from you very soon.
Bye,
Goodbye.
everyone.